Hello and welcome to the Epilogue with Sihle Bolani. One of the most common things that you will hear from black professionals when you ask them about HR departments is, oh, hell no. So joining me on today's show is Lebo Masilela, who is a human relations executive, and she's going to help me get a better understanding of exactly what role HR should be performing in organizations. Lebo, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. So you have a very difficult task because generally, and with events that I speak at, when people start sharing their stories, the first thing that always comes up is there anybody from HR in the room before I say what I want to say?
Yes.
So theoretically, what should HR practitioners be doing?
Sure. So the HR profession is quite layered, okay, and the role is quite layered in itself. So there's a myriad of things that HR professionals need to be doing. A summary would be to act as a consultant that bridges the gap between management and employees, or the business and employees. So that's a basic summary, really, of what HR should be doing.
And how has the understanding of that role evolved in organizations? And does HR actually have an influence?
So HR has really, really evolved over the years. I mean, you look at 20, even 10 years back, you had personnel management, which was essentially the admin people who would do your leave, who would draft letters for managers, who'd basically do the administrative stuff, right? And over the years, it has evolved to include becoming part of the executive team, ensuring that you are contributing to the bottom line, which is profits. You are strategically aligned in terms of the business strategy. So it's become far more commercialized, and also looking at how you use your human capital to best benefit the business. So, throwing in initiatives, etc., to make sure that the business runs well from a human capital perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the moment, we're experiencing a lot of trust issues between employees and HR specialists. What, in your view, is the root cause of that mistrust?
So, first of all, I would like to approach it by saying trust is a decision on anyone's part. Having said that, I also understand that there is trust issues, yes. I think the reason why there are trust issues is because, like any other employee in any business, HR people are also employees. They are also brought on to serve a certain function, right? Now, very many times the scapegoat of many things is HR. And as HR practitioners, we find ourselves in a catch-22 situation very many times. And that is when you don't have, as an HR person, don't have your processes in place, or you don't know what it is that you need to be doing within a specific environment. So there's lots of things that management will ask you to do that is essentially their responsibility to do. So managers, for argument's sake, will want somebody dismissed, and they'll come to you to do the dirty work instead of handling that themselves. Now, managers get paid a premium because they are leaders. They look after a department. They look after the functioning, the performance, etc. And they look after the human capital within their space, which they hired. So when it's not going great, they're very happy to pass it along. And unfortunately, as HR professionals who are also looking after our bread and butter, because I've got kids, I've got a home, I've got bills to pay, most HR professionals will take that on and do things that they know they're not supposed to be doing. So then essentially the HR becomes the bearer of bad news more often than not.
What can employees do to get HR policies to work best for them? Because every company you go to, there's a ton of policies.
Correct.
When you start, you have to sign this, that, and the other. And yet, when you fall into trouble in the organization, policies are always used against you, even if you may not necessarily be in the wrong. So what should employees be looking at or considering when looking at policies?
I would always recommend that you read those policies. Yes, it's documents and documents and documents, pages and pages and pages of policies. In your first few days, I don't think anybody is expecting anything wow from you at that stage. And also depending, I guess, on the level that you come in at in the organization. But take that time. If it's a day, a full day, take the time to read through your policies, read through your contract, understand it. If you don't understand it, highlight all the stuff that you don't understand. Go to your HR people and ask them to explain what they mean by that. Ask them to explain what examples of this do we mean in your policy. So what is an example that you can give to me? So very many times we're so quick to sign on the dotted line because we think, oh, I got a new job, it's great paying, and it's it's a new opportunity. But you go in and you sign all these documents, and then an hour later you've literally signed that you understand everything that you have signed and you agree to it when you actually haven't even read it. So when you do, if you want to start off hitting the ground in a new job, ask for those policies a week before you join, so that you can read through them, you can familiarize yourself with them, you can understand them. And if you've got questions, then on the first day of work, you've actually jotted down all those questions and you've done your homework. And I think it's a great principle to start and follow because it also gives the HR professionals things to look at that could change how the business runs their policies or how they implement their policies or processes. So if there's queries about the same thing in a policy every now and again, then obviously you have to look at that policy and see what works for your organization and for the employees. So I think it's a two-way street. However, the onus should be on the employee to ensure that they understand fully what the policies mean.
It's interesting. You mentioned two-way street, and it kind of sparked something for me in that, when you go for interviews, when you join an organization, as an employee, you are expected to be completely transparent about what you are earning, about what your skills and abilities are, about who you are as a person, your whole background, so that they understand whether you'll be a cultural fit or not. However, employees don't reciprocate in that, you probably the person who was in that role before you may have been earning far higher than you, but you would never know that. Or they may know that their culture is actually a toxic one, but they obviously won't say that to you up front, and you walk into this blind. So if we're saying that trust is a two-way street, how do we begin to bridge those gaps? Because obviously your interviews are with an HR person and with a line manager. And what is then the responsibility of HR in those conversations?
Okay. So I've found that when we say it's a toxic environment, it's either a small company that has a complete toxic environment, or in big organizations, it's in pockets, right? It's not throughout the entire organization. So it's very difficult to say it's a toxic environment unless you interview for that specific department. In that case, I can't really say do your homework because chances are when you are going for an interview somewhere, you don't know the people who are working there. And if you do know people who work in an organization, you'll probably speak to people who have a great manager. So for them, toxicity is a non-issue in their working world. So how do you deal with toxicity? I mean, toxic is toxic everywhere, whether it's in a relationship at home, it's with parents, it's with in-laws, it's in the workplace. You deal with it the best way you know how. I guess the advantage is that in a workplace you've got those policies, you've got the law to back you up. So use that. With your in-laws you don't have a law, to help you and to back you up. So I can't really say who must deal with toxicity and how. But you deal with it in the best way you know how. And secondly, I'd also mention that, when you're going through something, because similarly, the strange thing is that when I read your book, I was going through something similar, and that's another mistake that we think doesn't happen. So we don't think HR people actually also go through these types of issues, and they do. So I find that when you are in the moment, you actually don't quite know what to do, how to do it, where to go, how to think, how to feel. Am I imagining this? Am I not? So I always find it best to have someone that you are talking to who is knowledgeable in the stuff that you are going through. So get yourself an attorney, the money will be well spent, or get yourself an HR person who is au fait with these kind of laws or the policies, etc. So that when something happens at any given point in time, they can call you and say, listen, this person's just said this to me, how do I respond? Because you need that support. And I really just wish people could use that, use that support that you've got in friends and family, etc., to help you through the toxic environment and the toxicity until you're out of it. HR has a role to play in that. It depends on the type of HR person you've got. So, and the type of HR that the organization runs. So there are organizations, big organizations, that feel that HR is still administrative, HR personnel, and they should just, implement what the manager or the CEO says.
Yeah.
However, there are very progressive organizations who really believe in the influence that HR could bring to any table. So maybe an insight that you could get is, if it is a listed company, read through their financials and see whether there is an HR report in their financials. See whether they mention anything about, their people or their human capital. Find out whether the HR person sits at on exec level. Find out if they're on the board. Find out who they are, because usually it will give you an insight in terms of the type of organization that it is and how they actually run their human capital department or space or culture. It give you an insight, but it's not definitive. It's not stamped on.
Okay, so just going back to the issue of policies within an organization, how do we start working towards eliminating the vagueness in policies? For instance, there's a lot of very broad kind of point one, but for instance, if you look at something like, for instance, an organization can say, we do not tolerate bullying. But what does bullying actually mean? It kind of leaves it very open-ended. And so I may be a victim of bullying, but I won't know that because I don't know what the organization defines as bullying. Or I may know that I'm being bullied, but I can't prove it because I don't know how the organization defines it.
Right.
So what should we be doing, or what should HR departments be looking at in terms of policies and being clearer in terms of defining what the various issues of, that take place in the workplace are, how they are defined, so that people have a better understanding of how to deal with them or how to seek assistance?
So like I said earlier on, I think the onus is on the employee to make sure that they understand the policies, and the more feedback you're getting from the employees who are actually reading through their policies, the better the HR department is to structure those policies properly, right? Now, we'll take your example for bullying, for example. I think it can work on both sides, especially if it hasn't been articulated and properly defined in terms of what bullying is in our organization. So because it isn't defined, you can perceive bullying as anything. Somebody can say move over and you can say that is bullying, right? And no one can tell you otherwise because they haven't quite defined it. So, you obviously have to prove that the person did say move over and shoved you with their shoulder or whatever, but you'd have to prove that there is an element of bullying in what you are saying. So again, I'll go back to the answer that I gave earlier on. It is, your responsibility to ensure that you read through your policies, and then if you do need an explanation or an expansion on what anything means in there, is for you to go to your employees or to your HR person and say, listen, this is vague. I need to understand what this means.
So how do employers and HR people then meet each other halfway? Because we obviously are seeing, high numbers in constructive dismissals, in bullying cases, in employees being admitted to psychiatric institutions because of stress and anxiety and depression and all of these things. And yes, there is a partial responsibility on an employee to understand the policies, but if the policies are not clear, there's a responsibility from HR as well to be able to review their policies and say, within our environment, are our policies clear enough for all employees to understand? Because also understanding that, employees are all different. We all have different levels of understanding. especially when it comes to English, and is it simple and plain language and all of these other things and phrasing. So how then do we bridge that gap where everybody is kind of going, okay, we all have a role to play in ensuring that everybody's on the same page? Because if I come in and maybe I may not have gone to the best schools or whatnot and I get policies, I will read them, but I don't know to question anything, you know. And even if you look at it from the perspective of graduates who are new to the working environment, and they just see bullying and they kind of have a reference of bullying of what happened at school, you know, and that's their frame of reference, and they don't know to question and say, how does this organization define bullying? So how do we bridge those gaps?
So it's like with anything, you have to collect data, CJ. So if you are saying to me, HR has got a responsibility to review the policies, I as an HR exec can review policies, but if I have no feedback of the fact that bullying is an issue in our organization and it actually needs to be further defined in our policies, there's nothing I can do, because for me also, you know, there's no insight, there's no data coming to me to say these policies need to be changed, unless it's an update that that's legal, or that you know,
Legislation.
Yes. Then yes, I've got a responsibility to ensure that it aligns with the law. However, you know, if it's bullying, for example, and I don't get the feedback from my staff or my employees to say this is a challenge or this is an issue, we don't understand it, nothing is propelling me to change anything. So it's exactly like, you know, employee, employer. You obviously stand as an HR capital on the employer side when you're drafting policies, etc., to ensure that it is aligned with the legislation. It does look after your human capital, and it protects the business also.
Just your point about data,
Yes.
and why I'm trying to dig as deep as I can on this particular issue is there's various ways to collect data in an organization. Number one is the types of cases or grievances that are being funneled through the HR department that give you an indication of what types of issues people are dealing with, how they are articulating those issues, how they're able to provide proof to support their claims. There's exit interviews, which is another opportunity for people to give feedback on what their experience within the organization is, and in terms of the support that they have or did not receive from the organization. And then there's, you know, various other things like, should HR departments be running more polls so that people understand that they can actually give feedback on policies, that they can give feedback on things that they don't understand? Because sometimes the assumption is this is what the organization has given you and it is cast in stone and you just have to take it. And they're not sure, they're not aware that they actually can give feedback and say, you guys might want to consider elaborating on this for these reasons.
What's the question?
So, because it speaks to, you were saying that you don't have the data, but there's various ways to collect data. So are HR practitioners doing enough proactively to collect that data?
Some are, some aren't. I can't answer for all HR practitioners because we're obviously all at different levels. And like I said, there's some organizations that don't value the HR voice. So even if the data is being collected and even if the data is being presented, it will mean nothing to the CEO or, you know, to the MD or whoever's running that organization. So there are some people who are doing it, and I know a few who are brilliant at managing data and ensuring that something is done about that data. And there's some who just, you know, HR professionals who are just in jobs because they're in jobs. I can't talk for everyone.
Okay, so what do you think HR practitioners can be doing to rebuild this trust that has kind of evaporated between them and employees? How do we get to a point where people feel that if they go report an issue to an HR person or if they go for advice, that they know that they're going to be safe? and that they will be given good and fair advice, and that the processes that will be followed will be fair and ethical.
So first of all, I would start off with saying that the HR professionals who are in HR position needs to understand the role that they have, especially with connecting with people. I think very many people come into HR and think that you sit behind a desk and you just manage admin throughout for your entire career until you're 65 and retired. That is definitely not the case. How HR professionals can then build trust is to make the effort. So it's to make the effort in terms of educating your employees on a myriad of things. So what it is that HR actually does within that organization and what the employees can expect from an HR person. It's educating your employees again on what policy is and having like informal fun discussions where you actually discuss the policies, you discuss examples on the policy, you laugh about things, you allow people to question. So it sinks in as you're having that conversation. It's also around educating our managers, because very many times we assume that a brilliant performer will be a brilliant leader. And that is not the case. So those brilliant performers are promoted into positions that they have got no clue on how to show up in them. And they mess things up for anyone. So, a manager who has been promoted prematurely or who's been promoted unnecessarily because, they're not necessarily a leader or they don't want to be a leader, maybe they just want the perks of being management. They will never lead a team well enough. And when they're faced with fear or intimidation or whatever, they will, react, they will push back, they will become defensive. And unfortunately, those are the things that we need to look out for. It's part of life and how things work. I really wish that HR practitioners had the ability and gave themselves the permission to be able to step in and be the custodian at that point, be the custodian of the law, make sure that the justice is served in any situation. And rightfully, you do get situations where there's employees who generally do deserve, dismissal, but there's very many who don't deserve that, who really don't deserve it. And the question that I always ask in any situation is, who is this serving? So is this serving the employer? Is this serving the employee? Is this, and I look at it holistically. If it's serving the employee from all angles, from their emotional being, from their work perspective, from personal being, then maybe it isn't the right thing to do, because if a person is self-sabotaging, they potentially need something to wake them up through life. And if they have gone to the point where they have, transgressed and are facing a disciplinary, then the chances are they need to go through it in order to learn something and heal from something. I don't know what it is. But there's very, very many professionals or employees out there who go through, unjust
Hell.
situations. Who go
Hell.
through unjustified situations for no reason whatsoever. And it's at that point, unfortunately, it's at that point where we realize, oh shucks, I need to know my policies. Or, oh shucks, I signed this policy document that's 72 pages long, and I said, in the signature, I said, I'm signing because I've read and understood these policies. And you realize at that point that you signed your life away. So, even before, I'm recommending, before you sign these things, read what it says. It's like any contract. Read through it. Don't take it for granted. Read through what you need to read through.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Lebo, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
I hope that you guys have been able to get key outtakes from today's conversation. please read all of your policies because it impacts you and you don't want to be caught with your pants down when something goes wrong in the workplace. Reach out to your networks as well. There are so many people that are around you who have the expertise, who have the experience, who will be able to guide you and help you forge ahead within the work environment. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. We look forward to seeing you again next time, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this topic with your network. I'll see you again soon.